This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
The show will go on. So says the organizers of the Calgary Stampede amid a crisis situation in the southern Alberta city as that big water main rupture, that big break, that failure, that infrastructure failure that we've been talking about for a while. You remember we asked Alberta's premier about it just about a week ago on the show, despite the fact that Calgary is still on an advisory, that citizens, about 1 million people, are being asked to limit their usage, to shower every few days, to leave their flower beds and their lawns alone, to refrain from topping up their hot tubs. Folks haven't done laundry, some of them in a week, even 2, even longer. And with a 3 to 5 week delay on the horizon, the city making an announcement that everybody probably could see coming. And that is that the Calgary Stampede will continue on uninterrupted. We got that story for you, the details here today, plus a follow-up to my conversation yesterday with the Titan of Talk, Charles Adler, about that Canadian warship that's down in Havana, Cuba, alongside that Russian nuclear sub. We poked a little fun at it. We had some fun with it. I basically suggested I've seen more impressive ships hauling up crab traps, and we laughed, and then we heard from a bunch of you, including some Canadian veterans, including the Defense Minister's Director of Communications, Johnny. That's right, they're listening to Real Talk in Ottawa. And because this is a show with continuing conversations and accountability, because this is a show that you trust to give you the straight goods so you sound like the smartest person in your friend circle, we want to get to some of these emails. We appreciate when people take the time to further develop our understanding of the issues around us. And so we're going to go there today. Plus, a special edition of Real Talk today is we get set to observe National Indigenous Peoples Day. That's coming up on June 21st. We're going to be talking to a couple of researchers out of Athabasca University that are working on a fascinating project in partnership with Bigstone Cree Nation. They're taking a look at the impact of industry on traditional food sources like wild berries and game and water. We're talking about stuff like chemical glyphosate, like Roundup, Johnny, you know what? That, and I know more and more people. Yeah, don't ask me to say the technical or the chemical words too much. Yeah. You notice how I kind of just mumble my way through that. So we're going to hand that off to Dr. Janelle Baker, Dr. Srijak Vatnagar.
Thank gosh we've got some experts.
Oh my gosh, yeah. we thought it might be kind of a neat idea when we're sharing our opinions on things to also welcome experts into the fold.
Yeah, good idea.
But I think more and more people are kind of steering clear of things like Roundup on their lawn.
Oh yeah.
Even the over-the-counter stuff. Like, I've come from a farming family, not me in particular. There's no dirt under these fingernails, but all the farmers, anybody working in ag knows that sometimes you need the high-powered stuff to solve problems with pests or invasive species, right?
You've got the dog, dogs like we do. So when you get the pea grass, like we all do, what do you do to bring it back to life?
Well, I hired a landscaping company to put in artificial turf. Artificial turf was our... But what do you guys use?
We used to use a lot of different things. Now we're just like straight grass seed and just water. That's it.
And I think that you are the norm. I think more and more people are getting away from that. But the fact of the matter is, industry, a lot of times, chemical use, and chemical doesn't have to be a dirty word. However,
but it is.
Sometimes it is, and sometimes it's really impacting communities, including humans, including animals, and like we said, including food sources. So we're going to have a wonderful conversation today. I'm looking forward to that in anticipation of and in recognition of National Indigenous Peoples Day, which is happening just a few days from now. Plus, we have an amazing email from Andrea who wrote in, and I want to get to that today. But first, I want to remind you that episodes of Real Talk like this one happen with the presenting support of our friends at Alberta's top online real estate school. That's Rello, where better real estate training starts. Rello is real estate learning online for the bold and ambitious, and wherever you are in your career, Rello can help you find the next level. Maybe you're looking at a career in real estate, intrigued, and you'd like to learn more about preparing for that exam and getting your license. Maybe you've been in residential real estate forever, but you see opportunity in commercial real estate. Boy, is that a dynamic industry over the next 5 years or so, right? If you use the promo code Ryan100, that's all one word, at Relo.ca, they're going to take $100 off the Alberta commercial real estate bundle and the Alberta residential real estate bundle. $200 in total if you use that promo code twice. That's Ryan100 at Relo.ca. So this is one of those stories where, depending on who you talk to, it's either a huge deal or it's a total nothing burger. But there's this Canadian warship, and it's sharing anchorage. So it's down in Havana, Cuba, and
it does not look like this.
But here's the thing,
does it?
And like, I was being a smartass on yesterday's show, and then I was being a bigger smartass on Twitter, and I said, as we referenced an interview on Power and Politics with David Common, talking to Foreign Affairs Minister Melanie Joly. And he asks her, he says, basically like this Canadian warship, the HMCS Margaret Brooke, is sharing anchorage down in Havana with a Russian nuclear sub and these Russian ships, and basically what the hell is going on, and why is it important for Canada to be there? And the Foreign Affairs Minister says, I'm going to have to get back to you, because she says, this is news to me. That was her direct quote. She says, this is news to me.
Wow.
So then, of course, the internet explodes, and everybody says the Foreign Affairs Minister doesn't know that a Canadian warship is in Cuba, with Russian ships there. And of course, Cuban nationals, Cuban soldiers, as the BBC reported, hundreds of them are fighting for Vladimir Putin in Ukraine right now. Cubans are supporting the war in Ukraine, Russia's aggression against Ukraine. So people are going, like, what kind of a message does this send, right?
Of course.
So we're riffing on this, and I'm being a smartass, and I say on Twitter, well, I don't know what's more surprising, the fact that the Foreign Affairs Minister didn't know there's a Canadian warship in Cuba with the Russians, or the fact that we're still using vessels from the War of 1812. and I'm just being, I'm being an idiot, which is kind of like part of my calling card online. That's why you should follow me. Hopefully you get a chuckle every once in a while, because this thing was like covered in rust and this, that, and the other. And then a couple of people who actually know what they're talking about and did research reached out and said, that ship was that ship was basically brought into service in 2021. Wow. The ship is like 2 years old. And it's just beaten up and battered, because that's what happens when they're out at sea all the time.
Okay.
So I wanted to respond to these people, because in all seriousness, we're not like sort of the anger machine. That's not really Real Talk style. We're not trying to lead people astray with misinformation. In fact, we're trying to combat it, right? Yeah. And so I reached out to a couple of people personally, on Twitter in particular, and I said, I was just joking around. I was just kidding. But obviously the boat does look a little beat up, and I guess it was just unimpressive. But the real story here is the fact that the Foreign Affairs Minister didn't appear to know what was going on. Now, supporters of this government, and a lot of military folks, as a matter of fact, and you're going to hear from some here in just a second, one in particular from Ken, reached out and said, you guys, this is the Minister of National Defense. This is the Defense Minister's Department, not the Foreign Affairs Minister's Department. You're barking up the wrong tree. You're spinning this. And the critics of the Trudeau Liberals, the opposition Conservatives were making hay on this, calling this reckless, calling it dangerous, saying they're putting Canadian servicemen and women in harm's way potentially by being down in Cuba.
Sure.
So people are kind of wondering, well, what should we make of this? What should we think about this? So we're talking to Charles Adler, the Emmy Award winner. Of course, Chuck joins us the first episode of every week, and we're talking in particular about the optics of Canada sending military resources, naval resources, I should say, down to Cuba for this. And Chuck focused in particular on the messaging that the Prime Minister's office had pushed out over the weekend, talking about these 20,000 or so, it's estimated. And think of, sometimes numbers rattle off our tongues, and I want to stop to think about that for a second. More than 20,000 Ukrainian children that have been kidnapped by the Russians. The Prime Minister tweets about this, says we're going to work to bring them home. And so combined with this story in Cuba, here's part of what Adler had to say last episode.
Over the weekend, the Prime Minister put a tweet out about the thousands of children, not dozens, thousands of children stolen. That means kidnapped. That means abducted, okay? That means having crimes against them. Russians stealing Ukrainian children, taking them to Russia. God knows what the Russians are doing to those Ukrainian children, but the Prime Minister, Melanie Joly's boss, the senior CEO in this country nationally, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, said to those children that we, Canada, would be involved in bringing them back. So no country that makes a pledge to thousands of children to bring them out of Russia should be partnering in any way, shape, or form with a Russian ship.
So this is Adler basically taking issue with the fact that Canada's even down there. The fact that we're celebrating this bilateral relationship with Cuba, the timing just seems off, right? So it prompted some of you to write in, including this from Ken, who signs off as a concerned veteran, to talk at ryanjesperson.com. He says, Jespo, Charles, I'm writing to express my concerns regarding recent comments made about the Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Navy. As a veteran who proudly served on the HMCS Saskatchewan and the HMCS Chaudière, thank you for your service, Ken. He says, I find it disheartening to hear disparaging remarks about the institutions and the personnel that have played such a significant role in my life and the lives of many Canadians. I'm going to respond, but I'll get to the end of it first. He says, the pride and dedication that current members of the Canadian Armed Forces and the Royal Canadian Navy exhibit are no different from what we experienced in past. And it's important to remember that the equipment and the resources provided to our military are a reflection of our nation's commitment to defense, funded by taxpayers like you. And so before making judgments, I urge you to consider the sacrifices made by our service members and the historical context of budget allocations, which have seen cuts over the years. Yeah, no kidding, Ken, right? He says, I propose a constructive dialogue on how we can better support our military, perhaps through dedicated funding like, I don't know, a 1% GST increase, for defense equipment or other financial strategies. Ken says it's crucial to have an informed perspective on these matters, and I encourage you to research the history of defense budgeting in Canada. Says, thanks for taking the time to consider my viewpoint. Number one, thank you for your service. Number two, I don't remember, and I'm quite certain we didn't make any disparaging remarks about personnel in the Canadian Armed Forces.
No, not at all.
But if it landed that way, and I know you're not supposed to say if I offended you, I'm sorry. So let me just say this, Ken, I apologize. And I did not intend, it was not my intention to make disparaging remarks about our servicemen and women that proudly serve this country. Not even close. If anything, we want to put pressure on the decision makers to ensure that our planes are top notch, that our ships are top notch, that we're not sending soldiers, that we're not sending peacekeepers, that we're not sending people that are trained to help firefighters, military personnel, wherever it is in Ukraine or elsewhere around the world, into deployment scenarios with equipment that, quite frankly, isn't up to snuff. We want to make sure that it is. And I appreciate you taking the time, Ken, to talk to us. How about this one from RB, who wrote in and said, Jespo, I was listening to your conversation with Adler on the latest episode of Real Talk. He says the HMCS Margaret Brooke is the second ship in the Harry DeWolf offshore patrol vessel class for ships for the Canadian Navy. We fact-checked this before we read this, and it turns out that RB knows what he's talking about here. And he basically says, 8 offshore patrol vessels, 6 for the Navy, 2 for the Coast Guard. They're meant to replace aging and ineffective patrol vessels that are as far away from modern as you can possibly imagine. They're not crab fishing vessels, Jespo. If you want to see I was kidding, but I'll take the point. If you want to see a crab fishing vessel and get a real kick out of the state of our Navy, look at the ships that the Harry DeWolf class is replacing. They're also not meant to be in a stand-up fight with our adversaries. As the name suggests, they're meant to patrol. They're meant to protect our national interests. And they're also not replacements for the Halifax-class frigates, the big, old ships of the Navy that are part of protecting and projecting ourselves on the high seas. The replacement for those are coming in the near future, some even expected to begin construction later this year. And once built, our Navy will be somewhat more modernized with stunningly beautiful new frigates. RB says, now this is not necessarily a flamethrower presented by the DQs of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. I just wanted to clarify a couple of things. Our Navy is in desperate need of modernization, and I feel like it's coming relatively soon, but not soon enough if you ask me. He also says, and I also don't think that we should acquiesce to the American position on Cuba. But that's a whole other can of worms meant for some other time. That from RB.
Thanks, RB.
Yeah, I appreciate that, right? And interesting, and I like that he takes that position. Maybe Canada's relationship with Cuba should look different than the Americans. And Canada's relationship with Cuba has looked different than the Americans.
Yeah.
I sent you that tweet yesterday. I don't know if you ended up seeing it. I thought it was kind of an interesting point that somebody responded to our comments yesterday, and this from Roddy, who said that Andrew Coyne, the conservative commentator, that Andrew Coyne is something. Canada doesn't do enough for NATO, he says. We aren't insignificant, he says, except we just parked a Canadian Navy warship the closest to a Russian nuclear sub than anyone at NATO ever has. That from Roddy. I think he was sort of implying that Canada pulled a fast one and got nice and close to the Russians. Here's what I think is somewhat flawed about Roddy's take. He's implying, without saying it, that if we wanted to, we could blast off a couple torpedoes and take down the nuclear sub. Of course, what Roddy's alluding to would also set off a full-blown World War III type scenario, blowing up a Russian sub inside Cuba. And
Putin doesn't mess around.
That's happening. Well, he kind of did fuck around and find out in Ukraine.
You know what I mean? No, that would be.
If you blow up his nuclear sub in Havana, that's not going to be something. I don't know. That feels like a. Anyway, that blew up a sub in Havana. Sounds like some sort of a song that might I can hear a Cuban night. And then we got this from Daniel Minden, who I want to reference this. We did get an email directly to talk@ryanjesperson.com from the Director of Communications for the Federal Defense Minister, Bill Blair. And we appreciate this. He said, I've listened to your show this morning about the visit of HMCS Margaret Brooke to Havana. He says, I wanted to clarify a couple of things. Unfortunately, the initial cut, you remember we referenced that CBC reporting?
Yes.
And this is not me shirking responsibility, but we did reference some CBC reporting on this. And he says that article that you referenced got a few things wrong, and it was written without our office's comment. He says Minister Blair addressed that port visit, and here's the bottom line. This directly from the Director of Comms for the Defense Minister. This is a military mission. From the very first moment that Russian vessels entered the Atlantic and began their journey down the eastern seaboard, Canada and the United States worked collaboratively and together in order to track the movement of those ships. And as they entered into Cuban waters, we were able to continue into the Havana harbor. That was part of the job.
Wow.
He says we are working closely in cooperations with the United States. We've deployed a number of Canadian naval vessels, including the Vie de Quebec and a CP-140 patrol aircraft. He says they are there visiting Havana to demonstrate Canada's presence, naval capability, and commitment to safe and open waters in the Americas. And to be very clear, this was a direct result of a request that was made by the commander of Canadian Joint Operations Command and the admiral in charge of the Royal Canadian Navy. The port visit was carefully planned at Canada's request, and the deployment of these ships and aircraft sends a very clear message that Canada has a capable and deployable military, and we will not hesitate to do what is required to protect our national interests.
There is no better place to do a reconnaissance mission than right next to it in a port where you can jump on the deck.
So,
as long as we don't see them cracking beers and cheersing, I think we're okay.
So this is just kind of like this. This is a show where we want you as a listener, as a viewer, to have confidence that if there's more information that surfaces, or if we've got something wrong, or if there's more to the story, or if there's a different perspective that adds value, that adds a deeper understanding of an issue, that's the type of thing that we're going to pursue. That's something that we're going to prioritize. And so we appreciate the feedback from Ken and from RB and from the office of the Minister of National Defense, and this is a story that we'll continue to keep an eye on, and we appreciate your feedback. Before we get to our guest today, because we've got a really neat story, these Athabasca University researchers working with the Bigstone Cree Nation, this story out of Calgary is wild, hey? This water main break, have you been following it? They've now got pipe coming up, a specific piece that they had to source from down in the United States, but they're staying still. And Mayor Jody Gondek, the embattled mayor of Calgary, stood in front of the cameras yesterday again and was just trying to, convince people to stay the course, to stick to their plan of limiting their water usage. But I was chatting with a friend from Calgary yesterday about this. As a matter of fact, she works in crisis communications. And she was telling me that it's getting nasty down there. Like, some people are completely ignoring those requests to limit their water. Other folks are calling in and as we might put it candidly, to rat on their neighbors. But she's telling me that people are down in Calgary, some folks, shortly after putting in their gardens. This is a big deal.
Oh, no.
Some people go spend like Whatever people spend, like let's say $500 to $3,000 for a lot of people on flowers and planters and hanging baskets, and they get it all in the ground, and then boom, this water main goes, and the city says, you're not allowed to use water, or please limit your water usage. So you got people on the same street in Calgary. Some of them haven't showered for days.
Yeah.
You know, a friend of mine said he's never going to look at wet wipes the same. I asked him, what took you so long, bud? Wet wipes are one of our great inventions.
Sure.
But there's people that haven't showered for like a week.
Yeah.
There's people that haven't done their laundry forever. There's people that are watching their geraniums just die. And then there's other folks on the street like sprinklers going. My friend down in Calgary, I'm not going to name her, in crisis comps told me someone on her street was filling their hot tub in broad daylight the other day, like draining it for the summer and refilling the hot tub. If it's the same size as ours, that's 1,000 liters.
I feel like this happens a lot, though. You know, when we have brownouts here, like we have recently, and, you know, they say don't use your oven, don't use your stove, don't use this and that. It's different when, you know, you got to break out like a backup battery pack to power some lights if the electricity goes out. But water is like essential, right? So I'm just wondering what these people are thinking. Like, yeah, if you have to take a shower, take a shower. But watering the garden, that's no.
Yeah. So the Calgary Stampede, this is what everybody's got circled on the calendar.
Yeah.
Because as soon as Mayor Gondek says we're looking at a 3 to 5 week window before we can get this water main repaired.
With all those
Keep in
people
mind, like
coming.
the entire area of Bowness is like still under a boil water advisory. They're trucking in water. I mean, this is a real situation. And the Calgary Stampede, I mean, you know, someone says to me yesterday, they're going to have to cancel the Stampede. And I almost, like, I guffawed. I just went, ha! It was like my jerk, like my knee jerk reaction. You remember back in 2013, when there was water up to like row 15 of the Saddle Dome. You remember this? Obviously, the southern Alberta floods, an absolute disaster. Remember the head of their mascot, Harvey the Hound, had been like floating around in the mud, and it was all a mess. And like
it's a nightmare, that picture.
And I will never forget that Calgary Stampede, that edition of it called Hell or High Water. And they refused. They absolutely would not cancel the Calgary Stampede. You look at the steps they took during COVID, during the pandemic, to make sure that the Calgary Stampede could happen. This is, like, when it comes to what Calgary, and I'm a born and raised Calgarian. I've spent 25 years of my life in that city. I love Calgary. Calgary's got a real strong relationship with the Stampede, and the Stampede says a lot about Calgary. And so there's no way that they're going to cancel this, but the city's going to have to find a way to make this happen. You know, they're expecting, obviously, I mean, they get out more than 100,000 people easily through the gates every single day. You think of the strain on the water resources.
This has to be cleared up. I mean, you think of like the animals on Earth that consume the most water. You know me, the animal guy, I'm thinking cows consume the most water out of any land mammal. And then you've got horses as well. Like, how are you going to take care of all these animals drinking gallons and gallons of water after this horrible emergency?
What about
I do not see it happening.
What about all the toilets flushing?
The porta potties.
What about just think of the amount of water that they use for absolutely everything. I mean, I'm a big fan of the chuck wagons. I know that not everybody is. That's fine.
The influx
but a lot of times
people at
you'll
hotels,
even see them getting that water down on that track, like spraying the track. I mean, there's just a million different things you're going to use water for. All the hospitality vendors. I mean, nobody in the Cowboys beer tent is going to be drinking any water. They don't have to worry about that. Mix in a water, folks, would you? But this is going to be an interesting story to follow, and we'll have to see how the city of Calgary responds to this. I see sort of an 11th hour heroic fix, right? Like I'm thinking back in the day, I don't know why I'm thinking of baby Jessica in Texas. You remember that story where the little 18-month-old girl fell down the well? You remember that? And then the eyes of the world were on it, and they had the drillers going, and I can sort of see this. It's like the eyes of the world on as this piece of pipe will be trucked into Calgary, and they'll have the news helicopters circling it and bringing it in. They'll have the heroic welders and pipe fitters working to get it back, and the water will flow again just in time for the Calgary Stampede Parade.
The other thing, though, is like if they actually pull this off, if they pull this all together and they use all this water for the Calgary Stampede, and then you've still got First Nation developments where they don't have clean water, it just seems like a big what the fuck is going on to me.
Yeah.
Like, if you can pull this off for a big party in the city of Calgary, but you can't give people clean drinking water that have been needing it for years, I don't get it.
Yeah, a lot of people, including Horse Lake Ranch, good to see you in on the live chat, says they can suck the water out of the river for livestock. Others are saying that they got lots of money to truck in water for the animals, for the livestock. You don't have to be worrying about that.
Yeah, Travis here says cattle is not on the city water. I don't even know what that means. Do they bring their own water?
Well, no, but it's just probably they have different water sources for ag, for livestock, for things like that. And obviously they'll be trucking in water. But just think of the logistics around this. Just think of the challenge around this. And then there's also the optics, right? Like, let me reference this. I keep talking about my pal she's in crisis comms, and I'm not going to use her name because I don't have her permission to, but I asked her, I said, listen, she says this is being handled so poorly. And this is like a 20-year veteran of her industry. She works big files. And I said, well, what do you mean? She says, well, I'm not sure who's in charge, but it seems like they didn't learn anything from the pandemic. Telling the general public to sacrifice something for someone else doesn't work. Or it only works for a short period of time. Most people don't care about anybody but themselves.
Well, I'm saying this when we had the brownouts here recently. I was texting with a friend, and I'm like, yeah, we're gonna eat this for dinner tonight. We can't use the stove, and they're like, why? And I'm like, dude, what do you mean why? Like, we're not supposed to be using anything except like LED lights or whatever.
Yeah,
right?
And even then, they wanted everybody limiting power as much as possible so as to avoid, the mandatory
I think some people
blackouts,
it just goes over their head. And then I think of people, I'm not like saying eat the rich here, but like those people in those big mansions or whatever, are they even seeing the news? Do they even care? I don't think.
Why are you making this about?
You know what I mean? I think Daryl Cates is hopping in his shower and having a shower, whether it's, he doesn't give a shit.
Well, here's the thing. Number one, Daryl Cates isn't in Calgary. Let's not pick a fight with
You know what I
Let's
mean.
not pick a fight. And by the way, game day, let's not pick a fight with the Oilers.
I'm trying to tie it in.
But I get what you're saying. But I will say this. I think regardless of income bracket, I think regardless of how much you make or where you live, a lot of people believe it's the same as cigarette butts, right? People that like we talked to the cigarette surfboard. You remember that in our filmmakers roundtable like a month or two ago? That was amazing. And he dropped that number on us that it's estimated that 1 trillion cigarette butts wind up in the ocean every year. 1 trillion, 1,000 billion cigarette butts. Made me sick to my stomach to hear it.
I couldn't even believe that.
But you know
number.
why,
I couldn't
Johnny?
believe it.
It's because every single person, that'll flick a cigarette into the ocean or somewhere that feeds into the ocean thinks that it's just their one cigarette butt. They're not part of the problem. In so many ways as people down in Calgary think my geraniums, my prized summer annuals, my prized perennials that are just coming up. If I just water them a little bit at 2 a.m, here's what I'm saying.
Secretly?
If I just sneak in, this is the mindset. If I just sneak in a 5-minute shower, somebody's got a first date coming up. They don't want to go to the first date washed with wet wipes. They want to go lathered up and smelling great, just in case the date goes best case scenario. And they don't think that their 5 minutes in the shower is going to make a difference. They don't think that their 5 minutes in the shower is going to bring the city's water supply to its knees. And so they have that quick 5-minute shower. But here's the thing. There's like 350,000 out of the million people that are all thinking the exact same thing. And so that's where the problem lies. So the optics on this will be interesting to see. Like I said, if you get that 11th hour heroism and you get that pipe fixed and the water flows just in time for Stampede, it's going to be one of the stories of the summer. And if they don't, and if Calgary's still rationing water and people are being asked to not shower and hold off on the laundry and let their plants die outside, but then they see partygoers and revelers at the Calgary Stampede, and a lot of people are going to be there, it's worth the Calgary Stampede an infusion of almost $300 million to that city. If people see that happening, and if people see water getting wasted, or they even perceive that they see water getting wasted, then it's going to be pretty tough to keep people on the same page with that water advisory, to say the very least. I want to hear from Real Talkers down in Calgary. Where are you at with this? How are you managing? What does your last few weeks look like? Shoot us a note to talk@ryanjesperson.com, and we'll continue to talk about this through the week. Wanted to let you know as well, by the way, national political commentator, one of my favorite writers, he's an absolute talent, Paul Wells, is going to be joining us on the June 19th episode of Real Talk. If you're listening to this live or the day we're recording it, that's tomorrow. We're going to ask Paul about that story about the Canadian warship down in Cuba, plus other political stories of the day. That's coming up on June 19th right here on Real Talk. Before we get to our feature roundtable ahead of National Indigenous Peoples Day, I want to ask, have you got your tickets yet for Zin on the River? It's coming up on the 26th of June. In just over a week, I am so proud to be hosting this event in support of CASA Youth Mental Health. They're bringing Zin on the River to the best patio in Edmonton. Of course, that's the Fairmont Hotel McDonald. This was the event that was created by philanthropist, local media legend Nick Lees, and since 2015, it's been a fundraiser for CASA, for youth mental health. It's hosted at the Empire Ballroom and the Terrace at the Fairmont Hotel Mac. You can look forward to sampling charcuterie, fabulous wines, scotch, and also enjoying delicious desserts and live music by Silk and Strings. Plus, we've got a live auction, a silent auction, and a 50-50 raffle, all in support of CASA. Bonnie Blakely, the CEO of CASA, joined us in studio just yesterday. That's June 17th. If you want to check out more about what they're doing to double youth mental health supports in Alberta over 3 years, but there's still a lot of work to go. Tickets are just $100 with all proceeds going to CASA. You can check out casamentalhealth.org to get your tickets. Our friends at California Closets want to help you get organized this summer. They want to help you find a perfect solution, whether that's your bedroom, whether that's a secondary bedroom, a guest room doubling as a home office, whether it's your laundry room or even your garage. The team at California Closets are Alberta's best when it comes to custom closets and storage solutions for the entire home. The best part about it, you got nothing to lose by reaching out for a free consultation. You tell them your vision, you tell them your budget, and they tell you how they can deliver at californiaclosets.ca. And as our thoughts are with our fellow Canadians in Northwest Territories, we see more evacuation orders due to wildfires. 'Tis the season. The team at Complete Care Restoration is ready to respond. They've been doing work across Western Canada, in particular in Alberta, for more than a quarter century. Not just restoring properties, but rebuilding peace of mind. If disaster strikes, could be fire, could be flood, could be asbestos, could be black mold or other toxic materials, Complete Care Restoration has the trained and certified professionals to ensure that the job gets done right. You can reach them or learn more about their services at completecarerestoration.ca.
Okay, yeah, well, it's true. I have never lived on a farm, so I have been righted here. Apparently, they do truck in most of the water for the animals at the Calgary Stampede. So there you go. From West Calgary and other places. I, as a guy whose uncle is a veterinarian and working specifically on race horses, should have probably known that. But I've never asked him about water.
Johnny,
I've never asked him about water.
You don't have to apologize for not knowing where they get the water for the stock at the Calgary Stampede.
No, but that was my first thought when we were talking about this was, whoa, those animals need a lot of water. Apparently it's trucked in.
I mean, I'm just thinking about things like, imagine how many ice cubes they make for the Calgary
for the
Stampede.
Drinks alone.
Imagine the demand that Calgary's downtown hotels draw during
gosh.
that. But listen, this is a good thing. It's a good thing that we can generate. I mean, for perspective, they're estimating, Carrie Tate at the Globe and Mail has done some amazing reporting on the Oilers playoff run, on the Stanley Cup run, and it's estimated to this point that the Oilers Cup run through 3.5 rounds of the playoffs, and we know that this one's going 7. Mm-hmm. We know this one's going 7. So they've still got time to bump this number up, but they're estimating that it's already generated close to $185 million in economic activity in Edmonton. The reason I mention that, the Calgary Stampede is estimated to contribute $100 million more than that annually. So that's great. It's great for hoteliers, for restaurateurs, for entrepreneurs, for business owners, for retailers.
This one event.
It's huge. Yeah. And so they have to be able to make it happen, but obviously they're going to face a huge challenge here. But that's never been a problem for the Calgary Stampede. They're happy to stare those challenges down and meet them. June 21st. It's a Friday. It's National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we wanted to highlight a story of significance where there's either a partnership with a First Nation or maybe innovation happening, where research is working to participate in better understanding Indigenous culture, tradition, and significant elements of history of community, while at the same time reflecting present day challenges, innovation in the year 2024. And I'm grateful that these two Athabasca University researchers have made time for us today. Dr. Janelle Baker is an anthropologist who collaborates with a number of different First Nations, including Bigstone Cree Nation, to better understand the impact of industry on traditional food sources like wild berries, game, and water. Dr. Baker is a Métis background. Dr. Srijak Bhatnagar, you last heard on the show talking about microbes and addressing microplastics. You remember that? He's a computational biologist who's working with Dr. Baker and Bigstone Cree Nation on what's called the Labrador tea study, which we're going to learn more about today. Doctors, to both of you, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. Dr. Baker, can you explain to us this collaboration, this project, and the impetus or what prompted the research that you and the team are doing?
Yeah, I mean, this research is sort of grounded in research that I've been doing in collaboration with Bigstone Cree since about 2007. So it's sort of a long story, but really it comes from working with communities between my master's and PhD, doing traditional land use assessments, which are kind of part of the consultation process around industrial development and treaty rights. And in that time, elders, community members, hunters, people who are on the land, talked a lot about their concerns about contamination in their food. And so I ended up doing my doctoral research, working with communities to understand, especially Bigstone Cree, to understand their experiences with how their bush food is changing, and mostly in relationship with oil and gas at that time. But now when we go to work with them, they talk a lot about glyphosate, as you mentioned, right? So logging companies spraying glyphosate in the reforestation process. And yeah, so I don't want to just ramble on here, but the reason, so the way that Srijak and I work together is that, so when I'm working with elders, learning about culture, learning about their stories and ways of knowing the land, there's things that they tell us where they want studies done. And so there's been a lot of concern right now from community members about the spraying of herbicides on their traditional foods, their medicines, and the general ecosystem. And so I kind of pushed to pick this particular plant, Labrador tea, because it grows around the world. It's a circumboreal plant, but particularly across Canada in the boreal forest. And it has an interesting history. And we know that First Nations use the plant still a lot. And it's a really general use plant. Like, so people pick lots of it, they make tea with it. It's kind of something some people drink daily. So we thought it was a great plant to look at because it's in the areas that are being sprayed, but also our results could be useful to a lot more people than just, the little area that we work in.
By the way, please excuse yourself from any concern around rambling. As Dr. Bhatnagar will let you, we bring the smartest people on, and then we ask you to just free flow your ideas and your experience so we can just drink it all in and benefit from the work and the understanding that you're doing. Srijak, welcome back to the show. It's nice to see your face again. Dr. Baker touched on something very important, obviously, and in the spirit of this conversation and this roundtable. How do you approach a study like this, ensuring that you are truly seeking to understand the cultural significance of the issue at hand, the history, the traditions at play, whether it's food sources or otherwise? How do you approach research like this at the Bigstone Cree Nation?
So thank you for having me back on your show, Ryan. It's always a pleasure talking to you. To answer your question, how I and we have been approaching is unlike how traditionally sciences work, where we just go pick up our samples and study it in our own isolation, there's a lot of community consultation happening here. We have been working with the lands department in the band office, where they organize knowledge sharing circle where we can learn from the elders about various forest medicines, Labrador tea being one of them. When we go to the forest with some of the land department's Indigenous environmental monitors, So then they can inform us of like what's happening, what are the changes happening, because they live on the land. They have their trap lines there. They see what's happening, as opposed to whatever gets being reported to the government. So we work with them, and we also follow traditional cultural protocols. So we don't just go uproot Labrador tea for like, oh, this is our sample. We also offer tobacco to the land, which is the traditional practice to offer something back to the land in return for what we are getting from it. So before we pick any plant, we offer tobacco to it. We also listen and work with community members and lands department, as I mentioned, to also understand areas of concern. When I say areas, I mean like literal parts of land. Like, oh, this is where someone has gotten notification that there might be spraying happening, or this might be scheduled for a clear cut. And so they get to decide where we sample. They get to steer the project. So essentially, the science is being informed by the knowledge of the people.
Is this like when we look at sort of how research is happening present day, Dr. Baker, is this the new model? Like I think back, for example, we had a fascinating conversation on this show. It was a couple of years ago, but it was about wildfire management, and it was about preparing communities for wildfire. And the guest that we spoke with had such a compelling perspective on finding a balance between, yes, some human capabilities and the technology we have these days around, water bombers and choppers and all the stuff that we think of that we could throw at wildfire. But she also talked about Indigenous fire management and Indigenous fire keepers and land keepers and traditions that have lasted, if not millennia, certainly for centuries. Do you see this as a bigger trend when it comes to research, consultation with not just what the science and evidence is telling us through maybe sort of a more of a narrow lens, but also remembering the history and the traditions that have sustained communities for so long?
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, again, I'm a cultural anthropologist. I sort of specialize in what we might call ethnobiology and ethnobotany. So the scholars in my field and my maybe my scholarly ancestors have been talking about this for a really long time, where they go like, hey, these are people who know how to interact with the land, manage the land in ways that ensure their survival. Like it's embedded in their cultural beliefs and practices, right? So we have things to learn here, especially if you're a newcomer to a place, right? And so there's that. But then for sure, like now scientists very much are looking to partner with First Nations more and more and more. And so there's a lot of discussion around these ideas of sort of weaving knowledge or braiding knowledge. I even see, Alberta Environment is using this language. So I think there really is an effort and interest from the scientific community, not just the social science community, to better understand Indigenous science and help it inform the science that people are doing. And then it's just really a matter of what kind of brings us here in terms of Indigenous Peoples Day is like really understanding and working well with Indigenous communities, supporting them, understanding like the truth and reconciliation, calls to action, understanding community sovereignty around their own knowledge, or what we call data sovereignty. And in my opinion, again, because it's my bias as a cultural anthropologist, but is that we should really be listening to the Indigenous science first. So the way that Srijak and I work together, like we've described, is that we're listening to what community members share with us about their concerns, and sometimes like incredibly fascinating, subtle, what we might call indicators or ways that they understand and read the land that then they share with us that, just shoots ahead these sorts of projects and research because, we already have these incredible land-based observations. And, we can see this work being done around the world. And I would just like to also, acknowledge other types of people who work the land. So definitely, here today we're talking about our work with Indigenous communities, but other, newcomers, settlers, people, and even including Indigenous people who farm and use other types of land management practices that increase our food sovereignty. I think we really need to listen to them too about the changes, observations they have about the landscape, ways that they know to adapt, right? To to say droughts or forest fires or all sorts of land changes that they're experiencing.
Dr. Baker, can I just, in follow-up, can I ask you for an example, just off the top of your head? You said that, in understanding Indigenous science, you said that, you'll be speaking with elders or talking to community members, and they'll provide some insight into something that'll almost immediately advance your understanding on what's happening. What might be an example specifically from the Labrador Tea study with the Bigstone Cree Nation where this has been the case?
Yeah, I'd love to talk about a couple of other species too, but
please, no, take it wherever you like. You know it better than I do.
So, well, with Labrador tea, one of the things that I think that's really important that that we hear about that, and we're gonna hear people talk about more while we do more in the study, is the drying up of the muskeg, right, or the bogs, and the way that those plants, the way their flowering cycle is changing. So those seasonal changes, which Labrador tea is one species, but they see it in many, where the flowering on the plants is becoming unpredictable. They talk about the insects and the pollinators and how that affects them, but then also the unpredictability of, say, berries from flowering plants that produce berries. Or, but again, like I say, like those plants that grow in the muskeg, something that comes up a lot that really interests us is the idea that the plants are drying up, that they're responding differently to moisture and seasonal changes. But I want to share a couple of other interesting pieces that stick with me. And one is that some elders in Fort Mackay actually have told me that the beaver fur is different. So from the Athabasca River, they used to hunt and trap and eat a lot of these fur-bearing animals, and they see differences in the fur quality that gives them a signal, a sign that the beaver isn't healthy. They also use fat on animals like moose, like we're seeing, and so the amount of fat to them indicates the health and quality of the hunt or the animal. But to take it back to plants, for years, like when I started this work, like the traditional land use assessment work, like again back in even before I started working with Bigstone, so 2005, 2006, community members always talked about dust on the berries. and sometimes the response that they would get from those concerns is like, we'll wash the berries, right? It's just the dust, right? Like, but especially in northern Alberta and Treaty 8 territory, people were concerned about dust coming off industrial roads and mine sites, that sort of thing. So, over time, it has been shown by scientists that we partnered with that heavy metals are a vector, or the dust is a vector for heavy metals. So that dust that community members are concerned about actually do transport heavy metals to the plants. Another example is there was an area where elders talked a lot about, to bring it back to moisture and the muskeg, where elders talked a lot about an area where we were measuring the rainfall was lower, but the cranberries were really abundant. This place right here was Selena Harp is picking, actually. And yeah, so it's just like literally they describe it as a blanket, like a red blanket on the landscape, and it is in that location. And but the Q members said, well, it's the mist, it's the dew coming off the lake. And so in spite of there not being less rainfall, it was a place where the berries were really abundant because there was, a really high humidity when the berries needed it. So just like these really interesting observations they have that we can then connect with science. I don't like to prove or disprove what elders are saying. I feel like that can be kind of a problematic act, but to work with them in those concepts and incorporate them in our research and in our conversations, I think is really interesting and fruitful, pardon the pun.
Yeah, no, puns are allowed and oftentimes encouraged on this show. So that's it. Yeah, I'm just sort of letting that comment you just made land with me. You don't seek to prove or disprove elders. And that's, I think, like, I just want to keep reminding myself, this audience, the two of you, that the context of our conversation today, which is in recognition of National Indigenous Peoples Day, and we've chosen, your research and this project and this particular field, but bigger picture, there are lessons to be learned, there are conversations to be had. Do I understand correctly here, like Dr. Baker, you're more kind of, you're working like with the elders in the communities, and Dr. Batnagar, you're more like in the lab, you're working, sort of studying more at a microbial level. Is that sort of how this is breaking up?
For sure. Like I'm the social scientist.
Yes.
But that being said, we really do work in conversation. So I get to learn all these amazing things. I feel like I'm still a novice, but inevitably in this work, I get to learn a bit about the science. Certainly plant taxonomy is one thing I've had to teach myself.
Oh, I bet.
But likewise, Shrija comes to the field and hangs out, and we have gone to fish camps together and plant walks. And he was just in the field. I was supposed to go and wasn't able to, and so he was covering for me there and hanging out with people in the community. So and likewise, we've had Bigstone Cree hunters and environmental monitors that work on our projects come to the labs, do several days of training at the University of Calgary, in particular with Dr. Susan Kutz's lab. She's in veterinary sciences, and she helped us create moose monitoring kits and provided this incredible...
Sorry, wait. So I want to interrupt. Moose what kits?
Monitoring kits.
Moose monitoring kits. So, okay, cool.
Monitoring kits.
Yes.
So they're kits that the hunters can take out and do sampling that then they send back to Dr. Kutz's lab to look at moose health. Right, and potential contaminants in the moose. So elders, community members who are concerned about the changes in the health of moose and quality of the moose meat can take these like little kits with them that have little steps where they collect blood and parts of the animal, hide, and stick them all in the little bags, freeze them. There's even a bag for something weird, which always makes me think of Gary Larson's like a Far Side cartoon,
Great
like
reference.
some weird squiggly thing. But something unusual to give them that space to go, okay, there's something we are worried about that's not in one of the packages in the kit. And then they freeze them and we get them back. Usually they come to my freezer at home, and then we have a collection, and then we take them to Susan Kutz's lab, and her staff work on them and analyze, the ticks, the fat of the moose, that whether they have heavy metals, all sorts of things, depending on what the hunter was concerned about. So brucellosis is something that we've looked at. Not that we found it, but we were concerned about. So anyway, but her lab, for example, hosted like a 2 or 3 day seminar for us that all the researchers and the community members all went to, where we got to, look at things under the microscope, visit the provincial pathologist office, learn about zoonotic diseases right before COVID hit. So we were like, oh, we know what this is. And there was even a Norwegian moose researcher in her lab at the time. So we had a whole session on moose disease to help understand and detect diseases in moose. So anyway, my point is it's a two-way conversation, right? So people from the community who are interested in working on the project, helping people like Srijak in their lab, like we provide those opportunities, right? So and likewise, they invite us to their trap lines and their fish camps, and we get to hang out in the bush, which is really fun.
That must be like an incredible experience and like a huge honor, I would imagine. Before I get to Srijak, let me just ask you real quick. Is there something? Besides just being an absolutely majestic species, they're just one of the coolest animals on planet Earth. If anybody that's lucky enough to be hiking, and hopefully there's a bit of distance between you, especially if it's a bull or a cow with a calf, but like a moose crashing through or seeing a moose. I had this morning in a hike. This morning, it's like we're just making our coffee over the fire, and it's like, I don't know, it's probably not even 7:00 in the morning, and we look out into the lake, and across the lake, you can see this moose, and it rises up out of the water, and I'll never forget the water coming off. It's just like the most magnificent and beautiful animal. But I'm not here to write a love letter to the moose. I'm just curious to know, is there something about the moose that makes it a great candidate for this type of study, and maybe even more so than any other living being in the area?
Yeah, and you know what? Your love letter to the moose is totally appropriate
Yeah.
because in Northern Cree sort of storytelling and joking, people do talk a bit about there's a bit of a metaphor between hunting and say sexual prowess or love. And so you know, like one time I also saw this majestic bull moose with horns and my antlers, excuse me, and my friends teased me up there a lot about how that was kind of my moose, like my soulmate, but in a romantic kind of teasing way. So there is something about the way that a moose makes us feel awe and love, I think. But in particular, it was community members who wanted to do the study that we did on Moose and Water, where Srijak first joined us. It was Environment Climate Change Canada funding specifically for communities in the oil sands region. It's a provincial and federal partnership. And so it was community members who said that moose should be included, but it was no surprise because moose are the major food source. So also fish, but moose are a very, very revered and highly valued food source in that area. So, of course, people use the hides, they render the fat. So they make what they call pansawan, which is like that wonderful dry meat. If you're lucky enough, someone invites you to their house and you get to eat the dry meat and dip it in the rendered moose fat and put salt on it. It's like the most delicious thing.
This sounds...
But they also eat moose nose, but they kind of call it moose noose,
Really?
in English, yeah. And so that also, like, there's a certain generations. My friend Helen, who you've seen in this picture, who's a woman and an active moose hunter, she loves moose nose, right? They kind of peel it off and then get rid of the fur, singe off the fur, and then cook it in a soup, moose nose soup. My children who are really young have even eaten that. But anyway, so you can see how revered it is. And there's a concept that was first written about by Anne Garibaldi and Nancy Turner. Nancy Turner is a really well-known ethnobotanist. Anne Garibaldi was one of her students who worked in the region in Treaty 8, largely with Fort McKay. And so they came up with this idea or concept of cultural keystone species. And so it's really species that have like a deep sort of cultural meaning in terms of ceremony, oral tradition, and high value, and also clearly like a central food source. And so they first talked about moose. And so when I think about using moose in these studies, or when I make an argument, again, it might be more of a scientific context, I talk about this idea of cultural keystone species. It's branching from the idea of keystone species in ecology. And I'm sure that Anne Garibaldi, when she was writing about it, and again, this concept's been taken up all around the world. I was just in a congress in Morocco where there was like panels on the concept, right? Like where people are writing about it around the world now. But I'm sure that she was sort of thinking about how do we explain, like how do we do that cross-cultural communication? How do we explain to someone who don't have the privilege of hunting with a Cree elder or being a Cree hunter? How do we explain the deeper value of moose, right? Or certain plants? Like, how do we explain, like, even though we see moose all over, why do we need to take care with them? And so they came up with that concept as a way of explaining, the highly valued species in a cultural context.
It's kind of like you're reiterating the point that we were Johnny and I were discussing earlier around Calgary's water shortage and the issue there, which is maybe highlighting a flaw with humanity, and that is we need to understand how something impacts us or why something matters to us before we'll take action or meaningful action on something. In other words, people need to understand why, while you may not eat, and by the way, I wanted to recognize in our live chat, in particular, Sharon Morin, who's a wonderful friend of the show. She goes by Métis Sharon on social media. As soon as you mention moose, she just goes, so good. Like she's just very enthusiastic about this. But for somebody that, like you said, doesn't have the honor of participating in the field exercise or having a one-on-one conversation with an elder, how do they best understand, or how does this information best or most effectively land with them in the bigger context, right? Like Srijak, what are you seeing? I mean, I guess right now I'm going to do what I did to you before, which is ask you to like sum up years of research into a sound bite. But what are you learning in the lab and in the field, and what are you seeing? I mean, bringing this back to the impact of industry on traditional food sources and on the land and vis-a-vis the people. What are you seeing?
So before I answer that, Ryan, I learned working with the Bigstone Cree is the word moose actually came from a Cree word, mooswa. So that should tell you how important moose is for the Cree culture. That we literally took the word from the Cree language itself. I also want to go back to the aspect of the knowledge of people living on the land. I'll pitch you a hypothetical scenario. Imagine you're in your backyard and you see some random person just strolling through, taking pictures of a tree in your yard. And you're like, oh, what are you doing? And it's like, oh, there's a bird's nest up there, and I'm taking pictures and I'm taking samples and this and that. And that person comes back 2 months later and you're sipping your coffee yet again. And like, oh, what do you learn? Like, assuming you didn't kick them out in the first place, that why are you on my land? What do you learn? Oh, yeah, this looks like from the size of the chicks that this bald eagle's been here or laid the eggs 2 months ago or 3 weeks ago, and the nest is made of this wood. And you could be like, I could have just told you that. I sit out on my deck drinking coffee every day, and I saw when the bird was making the nest, I saw it pick the twigs from this tree, and I saw when the chicks hatched because I could hear it. And that basically is land-based knowledge of the person living there, where they could already, from a scientist perspective, they could already define a lot of things that as a scientist, I was like, I need to know this before I could do that. And they already know that because they live there, they see, they observe, and they know what's happening there. So anyhow, that's just an example of like what land-based knowledge or elder knowledge is, what they have been seeing and observing, and they know because they saw it.
And
Going
like
back
what
to
you're
what I'm
what you're
learning and
saying
what
is
we're
like
seeing is
what you're saying is
we've started looking.
Sweet, I'm just saying it's so obvious what you're saying. It's so obvious.
It is so obvious. I can give you a real life example. I was talking to this gentleman from Kuujjuaq in Nunavut, Quebec, where they're like, oh, these government scientists came and they like set up all these cameras to monitor. I can't remember if it was muskox or if it was caribou. And they're like, we haven't seen any here. So they basically set up their tent, they set up their cameras, hunkered down there, did not interact with the community for like weeks or months. And they're like, we don't see anything. And eventually they were in the community, and the community members were like, yeah, they're the moose. I can't remember what it was. The caribous don't go through there. They go through the other side of the town. So why did you set up camera there? Now you can imagine how much time and potentially money it could have saved just having this conversation with the people who live on the land. Another great example that I've come across is I want to say it's HMS Terror. That people have been searching for the ship and its wreck for years, and nobody talked to the Inuit who live around there until I want to say Arctic Research Foundation was just like in the community, talked to them, and they're like, oh yeah, every so often we see a mast sticking out over there under the water. We see a mast and so basically what would have been taking other folks like years and years, this was done in like days. Like, oh yeah, we found the wreck. And that's all just like the traditional knowledge, or how Inuit put it, IQ, or Inuit Kaimaitukanget. If I'm probably butchering the word, but what it literally translates to is what Inuit have always known to be true. Yeah.
That's thank you for sharing that. I hadn't heard about that, which the HMS Terror, and I'm reading about it right now. Actually, people can Google it or check out parks.canada.ca. There's some great resources there, really interesting stuff. So the implications of this at the end of the day could be wide-reaching, to say the least, right? Yeah. The implications on how we do research, on how we respect Indigenous science, on how we approach projects, and of course, on how we monitor. Like Srijek, you said something, I wrote it down when you said it because I thought it was interesting. You said what's happening versus what's being reported. And it reminded me of an ongoing conversation we've been having, and it's not a feel-good conversation at all. This one is kind of a feel-good, except for like the land being polluted and animals being impacted. There's nothing great about that. But there's positive collaboration here. There's a lot of respect that's evident here. Chief Alan Adam of the Fort Chipewyan First Nation has been a regular guest on this show, talking about, in particular, about that Curl oil sands, the Imperial oil sands facility leak, and really the Alberta Energy Regulator dropping the ball on this. Don't worry, the two of you. I won't drag you into my politics on this one, but it's a horrific and ridiculous story that deserves much more national attention. And we're going to keep talking about it. But you talked to Chief Adam, and he didn't need the Alberta Energy Regulator or Imperial Oil or anybody else to tell him that their water and their land was being polluted. They've known, and they've seen the impact on it, on human health and on environmental health in a very broad perspective. But that is an issue, isn't it? And in particular, when we're talking, Dr. Bhatnagar, about industry and industry activity. I'm not an enemy of industry, not at all. We need jobs, we need innovation, we need to heat our homes. Like, we all get it. But at what cost? How do you see what you're discovering here and the approach that you're taking impacting the conversation about industry and the environment? Where can you see that going?
What I'm hoping to provide to the community members, to the First Nation, is that, hey, there is this damage happening. You have been seeing it. We have now also started seeing. What then they can use the results for is to bring about, in the end, some change in how the industry operates or how the government rules and laws are, so that they have more self-determination over their own land. And that eventually is what it is, because same thing. I am a Calgary native, so you have been talking about water restrictions. You can imagine how people have been reacting to water restrictions, and they're like, my land, my lawn, my pansies, my flowers, and I'm going to water it. So that's just but imagine an entire community, the entire city, not being able to have control of their own water. What does that mean? So in this case, if we translate that back to how the forestry industry in this case operates, is what I've learned from the community is they don't have little to no control over how the forestry industry operates. So and Bigstone Cree Nation and Northern Alberta is also home to caribou, which are known to have migration patterns. And it's the community members who would know what those migration patterns are and where it's a sensitive areas forest, as opposed to me sitting in a lab in Calgary, or someone working for forestry industry sitting in BC or Alberta in a city somewhere in a city office. So the rights holder consultation here and the people whose land it is, where they hunt, where they get their food from, I think those are important aspects of this.
Yeah,
because we're not going to stop using paper. Like, can you imagine if everyone in Calgary switched to bidet right now? What would happen to the water usage, right?
Oh my gosh.
So,
yeah, no kidding. Are you coming to us from Calgary right now?
Luckily, no.
Okay.
I'm in Okanagan right now.
Yeah.
Traditional home of the Sioux people. But I was in Calgary Friday, Thursday, and let's just say in the last 2 weeks, it's been 2 weeks, I have taken 3 showers in Calgary.
Yeah.
Largely only possible because I was away on the Bigstone Cree Nation, collecting samples, working with the people. So I had running water with no restrictions.
Man, yeah, I can't imagine. That's a whole story. That's a whole thing unto its own. Before we thank you both for your time, Dr. Baker, I want to ask you the same thing. Like all things considered, the implications of this research. I can tell. I mean, I barely know you, but I can tell that this project has made a real impact on you. It's obvious. It's obvious in how you talk about it, your enthusiasm. For the benefit of the people listening on the podcast, let me say your face just like lights up when you talk about it. I can tell that you actually care about this. But when I ask you a broad question on purpose, what are the big picture implications of this research in the context of what we're talking about today? What would you say?
Okay, yeah. So speaking of our roots in Alberta, I grew up on a small farm outside of Sundre, and I live there now because at Athabasca University, we can live in Alberta anywhere. Like we have home-based offices. So I live in Sundre, some around, of all the farmers I grew up with and family members who farm and stuff. And of course, I watched as a child when all of our dads started working in oil and gas, right? And at the local sawmill. And so it's hard for me to, think of anyone that hasn't worked in oil and gas or logging in my own life. And so when I came to this work, I feel like I was maybe more moderate and, sort of about the ideas of the effects. And I actually didn't set out. Like, I think people assume like, oh, you work with First Nations in the oil sands, so you set out to like be an activist or something, right?
Right.
But the truth is, I was just interested. Like, I love the boreal forest, and I had opportunities to work with some amazing. Like, I worked together on traditional land use projects with some amazing families from Bigstone Cree, and I just loved it there. I loved how everyone speaks their language and celebrates being on the land, and there's so kind and welcoming and funny, and it's just I just love being there. And so in my research, my real passion is, like I mentioned, kind of ethnobotany or ethnobiology. Like, nothing makes me happier to go out with Helen Noski and go berry picking, and maybe get some Labrador tea and sit by the fire and have tea and tell stories and have a laugh. But inevitably, like everywhere I go in every community that I've worked for and with, comes to me with concerns about the changes in the landscape, concerns about pollution in their food. And I think people overlook, I think non-Indigenous people in Western Canada overlook how much Indigenous people still eat from the land. They still really prefer bush food. I know elders in the north who have never bought meat from a grocery store. Even Helen, who I mentioned, if we're on the road together somewhere, she brings her own dry meat and bannock. She doesn't eat in restaurants. And so, and something they call Indian popcorn, which are little bits of like deep fried kind of moose fat and meat,
Oh, amazing.
So delicious. Yeah, it's so good. But
there is no meat on planet Earth like moose meat.
I know. It's so good.
Yeah.
But anyway, my point is that like this tension or this idea of like impact on people's food sovereignty, security, and contamination is what has come to me through working with people, and I feel like I can't get away from it. And that in climate change, that mix of immediate industrial effect and large scale industrial effect, right? And so you asked me about outcomes. I think we all need to listen more, on things like Truth and Reconciliation Day, Indigenous Peoples Day. We need to pause and listen to what people are telling us. It's really important information. But also, if we go more specifically to glyphosate, I can't help but say I really don't think we should be spraying it in the forest. And just like Sri Jack said, communities should be able to decide whether or not the food that they're eating is being sprayed with glyphosate or herbicides, and, we're talking about water and lawns. Don't even get me started, like let's think better about the resources we put into our lawns, and think more about native species, right? That are interesting and useful, and that we don't have to water, that they survive there naturally. But again, to take it back to forestry and First Nations concerns, honestly, I would like to see, the communities have been trying, Bigstone's been really trying to advocate for, even offering to do their own slashing. They really don't want to see their food sprayed. And I think no matter what we prove in this study, through the lab work and the testing and the sampling that Sri Jack does, I think we need to respect and honor the fact that people just aren't comfortable with that being sprayed on their food. And that it creates an anxiety and an avoidance behavior where people are then avoiding their healthy foods and their traditions that inform their culture. And I think that's the really important thing. And so yeah, like I say, I came from a moderate place, but through the work, I feel fairly strongly about the changes that need to happen.
That's Dr. Janelle Baker, an anthropologist out of Athabasca University, joined by Dr. Srijak Bhatnagar as well, joining us from BC today, a computational biologist who's working with Dr. Baker and the Bigstone Cree Nation on this Labrador tea study, and obviously much more than that. You can read more about this project at athabascau.ca, and I will link to that as well as other resources in the show notes for the podcast and on YouTube if you'd like to learn more. Srijak, you looked like you wanted to say something before we let you go.
Yes, I do want to bring a bit of more context about glyphosate spraying. So you said you grew up on farm. And
No. My cousins did. I can't take credit.
And the farms does use fertilizer and herbicides,
100%,
maybe pesticides. And you can imagine it's not like the forest is just being sprayed with herbicide by itself. As part of forestry or logging, they're supposed to regenerate the forest, which means bringing it back to the state where it was. So you have a bunch of different types of trees, bunch of different types of bushes and shrubs and berries and whatnot. What is happening is I'm just not going to, under the guise of reforestation, we are converting them into farms of pine trees, farms of spruce trees, because there are, I want to say, a dozen approved species in Alberta for reforestation. So I want to reforest a land that I clear cut, then I have to grow the plants back or the trees back up. If I go and plant the seeds or the saplings or tiny little trees, they now have to compete with all the bushes and everything else that's there on the land that's part of the forest. So it takes a lot longer for them to regrow. But I can give them a little bit of help and just indiscriminately spray herbicide on that land. So what would happen is it hurts the broadleaf plants, it hurts the shrubs, it hurts the berries, it hurts Labrador tea. And by then actually damaging or destroying them, now I have created room for that one type of pine that I planted there to actually regrow. And then, oh, look, now the forest is back. But is it forest that's back? Because for me, as also a part microbial ecologist or ecologist, a forest is not just like one tree. It is a whole ecosystem of a bunch of different types of plants. But now by spraying it, I've converted it into a farm of pine trees, a farm of spruce trees, or whatever is the approved species of one type of plant I'm trying to grow in it. So we are essentially converting tracts and tracts of land from a healthy forest to a farm of one type of plant. And this is where the glyphosate spraying has come in, because we want to assume that, oh, it's being sprayed by someone wearing a backpack and spraying it. That need not be the case. There's a lot of helicopter or heli spraying that's happening, which means that there is also no control of where the glyphosate actually, disperses out to. There is, and it actually has been shown in northern BC where the glyphosate has moved into the berries. So we know it's coming into the berries for land-based way of living, then it's coming into traditional foods, all the forage foods. And then that means it could end up in humans, or it is ending up in humans. So what does it mean for human health also? Yeah. So I do want to bring in the context of it's not just that glyphosate is being sprayed, but what is actually happening is that the forests are no longer slowly are becoming not forest anymore, which could have massive implications on all life forms, not just forests, but also on the animals that are in the forest, food or not food.
Yeah. Such an important point. I'm so grateful for the two of you taking the time to talk to us today. We really appreciate it. That's Dr. Janelle Baker, Dr. Srijak Bhatnagar, researchers and obviously rock stars at Athabasca University. Be well, you two, and thank you for helping us set up the recognition coming up on June 21st. It is for National Indigenous Peoples Day. We'll talk to you both again soon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks for having us again.
You bet. I want to acknowledge in our live chat, Sharon says, thank you for this panel. Next time, let's have someone from the community on to see how they feel about these projects. And Randy Thunderhorse says, please always include a community member in these panels, especially when talking about a specific community. So I just wanted to let everybody know, we did have a third panelist confirmed up until, to be honest, about 90 minutes before we're doing this interview. Dr. Josie Auger is a member of the Bigstone Cree Nation. She is a researcher and a podcaster, by the way, out of Athabasca University. You may remember Dr. Auger joined us, and I'm just showing it on my screen right now. This was about a year ago. It was May 9th of 2023. And Dr. Auger joined us in studio to talk about her podcast project, which is really, really fascinating stuff. She talks about the ethics of research with Indigenous communities and provided such a valuable perspective. Unfortunately, she was forced to withdraw from participating on this roundtable, like I said, just a very short time ago, due to illness. But she very much wanted to be here. She's also a former council member with the Bigstone Cree Nation, so obviously would have provided a wonderful third perspective on this. We do recognize the point that Sharon and Randy are making, and obviously, whether we're talking about First Nations, Indigenous communities, or anywhere else, we're always wanting to talk to stakeholders, to people who are walking miles in the boots, to people who truly understand and are living and are experiencing the issues that we're talking about. We appreciate you reiterating that point, and I just wanted to mention that that Dr. Auger was intending and did want to join us today on the show, and obviously the door will always be open. We'll look forward to welcoming her back in future. That conversation was presented by our friends at Athabasca University, which is Canada's open university with world-class accredited online degrees and courses designed so you can complete your education wherever and whenever it works for you. That's kind of the whole point, right? It's the whole point of distance learning. Like we've got Dr. Baker joining us from her home area just outside Sundre. We've got Dr. Bhatnagar joining us. He's in BC right now. And if you're a student, or heck, if you're a researcher, a professor at AU, you don't have to be traveling to a brick and mortar university. You can open your options with the online offerings at Athabasca University, where your only commute is to your device. At AU, they are driven by a strong commitment to empower learners worldwide, embracing accessibility and flexibility. You can learn more about the AU Advantage by checking out athabascau.ca today. We're talking about lessening our environmental footprint. What about going solar? How are you powering your home or your building or your farm for that matter? Have you been looking into solar? If so, you're going to want to talk to the team at Cuba Renewable Energy. They're doing residential solar energy projects in BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Northwest Territories, and they do it all. Commercial, residential, agricultural, industrial, and they're hiring right now, by the way. You can get a free quote to get solar on your roof at kubienergy.ca. And if you're looking for work, if you're an electrician, an apprentice, a salesperson, an office manager, check out the careers link at kubienergy.ca. Some really healthy debate in the live chat. Johnny, I always feel bad bringing this up to you and as a plant-based member of our Relay family, of our Real Talk family, but there is a real debate going on here in the live chat, and I'm about to tell you about Alberta Pork Month here at Friesen Brothers. But people I said moose meat is by far, bar none, the best meat on the planet. Okay. Yeah, I did have some people asking where the heck the recognition is for elk. And so I want to give a shout out to the elk. I want to give a shout out to the elk out there. Yeah, you know what though? Yeah, well, they can use all the help they can get. At Friesen Brothers, there's another great cut of meat here. How about pork? There's nothing like pork belly, is there? What about pork ribs? Nothing like a great pork tenderloin, pork chops, whatever it is that floats your boat. June is Alberta Pork Month, and because it's barbecue season, Friesen Brothers is embracing this full on. As a matter of fact, all month long, all of their stores are proud to feature fresh Alberta pork carefully crafted by their butchers. They've got the perfect cuts for your grilling adventures this barbecue season. They've got recipes online. You can check that out at friesen.com. That's FRESON.com. And if you're fully enrolled with their Smart Shopper program, every time you purchase Alberta pork in store in the month of June, you qualify to win a Napoleon grill. You can find all the details and including more about that Smart Shoppers program by visiting their website, friesen.com. Man, I love having smart people like that on the show. Hey, I feel like we learn like 10, 15 different things every time we check in with them, and I want to give thanks to Drs. Baker and Batnagar for joining us. As we wrap today's show, we wanted to put a couple of quick things on your radar. Number one, if you are reaching us, if you're downloading Real Talk with Google Podcasts, that's about to end, and it's not just us. Google Podcast is wrapping things up on the 23rd of June. You will no longer be able to find Real Talk or any other podcast by way of Google. So make sure you sign up, subscribe to us to download the pod on Spotify, Apple Music, or wherever else you get your pods. And make sure you join us on June 19th for Paul Wells.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan